Okay, so today we're talking about online banking. It's one of the big fear topics for a lot of people because they feel that there are all sorts of risks with online banking. Well, there are. The risks are manageable, the risks are almost predictable, and the banks, bless a little cotton socks, have made a lot of effort to make it that bit more safe and also to give you more options. Now, we're going to walk through a few things in the next little while. We're going to look at basics. We're going to look at the difference between traditional banks and challenger banks. There was a report which called what we call traditional banks legacy banks, and I think it was HSBC threatened to take them to court, so they decided just to call them traditional. We're going to look at how online banking works, what the benefits are, and there are many, and we're then going to look at a summary just so we can try and pull it all back together. First of all, let's look at the very, very basics. Why is this happening? There's a number of things that are happening simultaneously. First of all, more and more people are going online, or a desktop was a fairly unusual thing. But first of all, with phones with internet access, and then latterly tablets with internet access, it became easier and easier and easier. Pushing in the other direction was the fact that banks are interested in maximizing their profits. There's a surprise for you. You didn't know that was happening. They're also moving from branches. Now, Ian Blackford pointing out that Virgin Money, which bought over the old Clydesdale bank, are closing branches right across Scotland, and a huge number of account holders. To go to the branch now involves a 100-mile drive in each direction when they have closed that branch, because banks don't want branches. I also noticed that my own building society, which of the branch that we use, I have to say they had done this 6 months before I noticed, because I only ever go there to drop off a check, if you remember what checks are. So realistically, the move from branches is inconvenient, but it's not fatal. Unless you're a small business and you want to lodge your takings on a regular basis, because branch closures are accelerating. They used to have, if you go somewhere like Morningside Road or St John's Road in Corstorphine, there would be one financial institution after another in that street. Now you'd be struggling sometimes to find even an ATM. In parallel to that, many of the branches have got fewer services. I was briefly a trustee of ACIT, and I had to sign a trustee's declaration and take it into the Bank of Scotland. When I got to the big Bank of Scotland at Toll Cross, there was nobody there could do it. All they are is for taking cash and sending, and giving cash out. They were not interested in, they've got no staff who could even validate who I am. Little bit of jumping up and down, they did it, and then they lost the paperwork. But it's a good example of what's actually happening with branches. Because the banks are now pushing to online banking. They can see the benefits, having initially been very anti it. They now see it as the way they're going to survive. They're pushing us that way, for good or for ill, and we'll look at both of those in the next few minutes. So let's look at the different kinds of banks there are out there, and we'll stick with the word traditional. Traditional banks are the ones that we all know in the high street, but there are also this other raft of banks called challengers who have got banking licenses. All of them have got UK banking licenses. Most of them have got EU banking licenses. So they are legally banks. They don't all do the same things. No, then again, nor do Barclays and Royal Bank, and all these people do the same things. They've got different strengths. Traditional banks are the ones that have bricks and mortar outlets. They have got real or whatever. You bank with Nationwide or the country where they still have a branch. You can go in there, the service we used to get 20 years ago, but they will provide a service to you to help you to do whatever it is you've got to do. The big banks can be inflexible, unfortunately. They like to do things their way, and they like you to do things their way, and they are inconsistent one and another, and it can be extremely frustrating if you're trying to do something different from what they want to do or in a different manner. And there is a reality that some of the banks have become a little bit unloved. It's no accident that I've got the HBOS one up there. If you remember, in the good old days, the Bank of Scotland, based on the Mound, used to be reckoned to be the best run bank in the United Kingdom. It was the most efficient, and although there were problems with it, they were still a good bank. After the HBOS merger, within a few years, they went bust. So they lost a lot of the love that Bank of Scotland had created. The service is variable across the various banks as well. I won't say which bank it was, but I used to run a charity, and I was the main account holder for the current account in that charity. And little things would happen, like we got a checkbook for a different charity altogether, or we would get transactions appearing in our current account that were for a different business altogether. And it got to the stage that each time it happened, I would get compensation, because I wasn't going to let, I wasn't going to let that one lie. One year in particular, in our annual accounts, and it was that stuff. Challenger banks are different animals altogether. Some of them may have one brand. As a killer, it's a killer completely differently. They don't all, they may have only, and the way they work will to other businesses. The bank, the shop that I went to, all of a sudden there were 2 transactions had appeared on my account. I came out the supermarket and I had been billed twice by them. I was on to the support chat immediately, and they looked at them, and they were from the exact same amount and from the exact same terminal, and they checked my history to make sure I wasn't a cancer, and they paused one of them and let the other one go through, so the retailer got the money. And a couple of days later, when the paused one had been disputed, that the money was freed in my account. Try doing that with your HBOS account. They have apps that are very, very flexible, and we'll look at some of the options on that. The traditional banks are catching up. They're catching up fast, but all the innovation in the banking app space is coming from the challenger banks, because they are, apart from one, all the ones that I'm looking at are FSCS protected, which means that if all your money is with them and they go bust, you are protected by the financial system. But these banks are technically years ahead. They are not starting from a legacy of computer systems that were written in the 70s and 80s. Now, I'm not going to name that bank, but I worked with one of them in the early 70s, and I know that software that I wrote 40 years ago was still being used in part to help them process direct debits. And technology has moved on by leaps and bounds from rafts of IBM mainframes. So how does this all work? How does online banking work? Is it safe? Well, the biggest risk is the device you're using. Your phone, your tablet, your laptop, whatever. And the first device, the same advice as I was laboring in last week's talk, is make sure that you're updating your device as you can. The latest version of the operating system. Always make sure that when the app is updated by your bank, that you are taking that update. At some point, if you have a very old phone or tablet, your banking app might stop working. That'll be because it can no longer handle the latest security facilities that are built into Android or Apple's iPhone operating system or whatever. And that then needs something you need to think about. But as long as you make sure you're only using apps from the App Store, whether it's Google Play or Apple's App Store, you are safe. Never ever download any app, banking or otherwise, from any stores apart from those ones, because that way you've got more chance of being safe. If your device has got fingerprint recognition or face recognition, make sure it's switched on the device, and make sure it's also enabled for your banking, so that if your phone was to be lifted by anybody, without your fingerprint or your face, they're not going to manage to get into your banking online. However, there's a side story here we need to think about, because I've been talking about apps. You can, on a laptop or a desktop or a phone or a tablet, but let's just leave them for the moment, you can go directly to the website of your financial institution. You can go there and access the banking that way. It's perfectly sound, it's a perfectly effective way of doing it, but the downside to it is that you've got to make absolutely sure that you're on the correct website and not a copycat, because that's a problem. You've got to make, and the way to do it, I would argue, is to make sure that you have bookmarked that, and we talked about that last week as well. You will then get all the facilities, and you'll get more facilities on the website than apps initially gave. However, apps have caught up with and now surpassed what you can do on the website. One of the issues on using the website is the encryption. It's good, but it's not as good as the app, because what happens is that your financial institution is actually managing the encryption for you, end to end. It's their app on your phone or tablet, and all the data is encrypted and as secure as it can be. Then wrap that inside your fingerprint or your Face ID, and the apps are a safer way of doing this, but only run on your phone or your tablet. There's nothing wrong with using your laptop or your desktop for online banking. I do it myself, but I far prefer to use the app. I think I've said in previous talks that over breakfast every morning, I go into I've got accounts with two major banks, one traditional and one challenger, for different purposes. And I check the balances and transactions on all of them every morning while I'm having my breakfast. And it takes less than 5 minutes. It's just a few quick taps and swipes, because that's the way I've set it up to do. The website, as I say, is a very flexible way of doing your online banking. Obviously, you want to make sure you're on the real institution, the real HBS or Barclays or whatever, and you check that by making sure that the padlock is there. The padlock means it is secure and it is genuine. There are risks in not doing that, but it only takes a fraction of a second to check that the padlock's there and it's a secure website. And increasingly, the web browser you're using will flag up anything that's unusual. And on a lot of web browsers, if you actually click on the padlock, it will confirm the detail of the security certificate is verified. So if you're really paranoid, you can check that. Even I'm not that paranoid. If you're using apps, they only work on phones and tablets. But yeah, we'll stick with that. They are usually more secure than going on to the website. And these days, you can do almost everything on your phone or tablet that you can do on the website. In fact, with some of the banks, you can do more now on the apps because they're developing ways of doing it. It's easy, it's fast, and it's generally very simple, much simpler than going onto the website would be. So what are the benefits to you of online banking? We know what the benefits are to the financial institutions. They're cutting costs and they're thereby making greater profits. But what can I do? Well, the security thing we've talked about. Is it secure? I would argue yes. I would sooner go into my app on my phone or my tablet and look at my bank details, move money between my accounts, pay my bills. We're coming up to the 1st of October. I have a number of big bills I've got to pay to Spain in the next couple of days, electric bills, community charges and all of that. Did it all online in my challenger bank, and there's no charge for moving money abroad. Now, go to your bank in the high street or whatever and say you want to send money to a Spanish account, and you'll get hit with a 20 or 30 pound charge. Guess why I use a challenger bank to do that? So what can it do for me? Well, it's simple. That's from just a screenshot, not from mine, it's just from the web. Looking at the ability to whip through your accounts from the nationwide and look at all the transactions. You can look at a year's worth of transactions using that particular app. And you can then search for, and funnily enough, I did that this morning, I can search for all the payments that went to one payee, or I can search for all the transactions of a particular type or whatever, and find exactly what I'm looking for. So I've got the ability to analyze it in a way that paper statements never could. Looking at the security side, now this is now 8 months old, and the analysis was probably done before it. But what Which did was they looked at various ways of categorizing the security of online banking. And this refers to using the website, not the app. But what they're saying is that if you go into the website, taking login issues, how encryption's management, how you can manage your account, how you can navigate around the website and how you can log out, they gave a score of 85 at one end and 46% to a bank at the other end. There is nothing wrong with even the one at the bottom. They have put a lot of time and effort and money into fixing those scores, by the way, since Which published it. But any of these banks are perfectly safe to do business with on the websites. But as I say, that is for the website. The apps are better. The apps are even more secure. You've got more controls over how things work. And this is just a list from one of the big American financials. Which banks in the UK that are operational in the UK do they think are secure and more flexible? So flexibility, this is where things get exciting, or I think they're exciting. Banks in their apps offer you a huge number of ways of managing your account, managing your risk. And I'm going to go through these in the next few minutes. This is not a must-have tick list, but going through the various apps that were out there and analyzing them, what I found is that there are a huge number of very, very clever and useful tools to allow you to manage your account and be safe. And it doesn't really matter if you're into branch banking or not, if you're into website banking or app banking. The risk is if you have your card in your hand and you go out to do shopping or get money or whatever, then there are always going to be risks. So, first of all, looking at your PIN number. Many of the apps, not all, and I'll keep saying that because this is just, I'm taking the best practice that I've found out there, will allow you to view your PIN number for a card. Now, you might have 2 or 3 cards with the institution, the bank, and if you're clever, you'll have different PIN numbers on each one. But it's easy to forget the PIN number and forget your PIN number 3 times and the card gets chewed. So if you forget, many of them, with your fingerprint or your face recognition done, many of them will, for a couple of seconds, show you the PIN number and then blank it again, so that anyone looking over your shoulder won't get to see it. So you can get a PIN reminder in your face, no bother at all. You can also block a PIN. So you can say that PIN number on that card blocked for the moment, and if anybody has got that PIN number because you think someone was watching, or you go up to an ATM, you unblock the PIN, you use the PIN and you block it again, anyone who's been shoulder surfing you, which does happen, or the little cameras that sometimes appear on ATMs, the PIN won't work because you block it for the few seconds that, you know, after a few seconds after you've used it, and unblock it to use it. It's an extra step to go through, but you can. Many of them will let you change the PIN number. Now, this is a bit more problematic because you've then got to go to particular kinds of ATMs for that actually to be confirmed. For instance, the Cashmaster ATMs that are popping up that charge you crazy amounts of money, they won't do it. But real banks, their ATMs will allow you to confirm the changed PIN when you go to that machine. The next issue is contactless payment. We all at times either use or see people using contactless payment, particularly in times of COVID. Handing over cash has kind of gone away in a lot of places, but the ability to switch contactless payment on or off is very useful. If you use it and then switch it off, if somebody has your card and tries to use your card to tap and pay for something, they can't. Equally, and it's a bit of a scam, but there was a period when people were walking around in busy tube stations and rail stations in London bumping into people, and in bumping into people they had a device in their backpack which would try and take transactions out of your contactless card because the tap was actually happening. That's largely been prevented now, though I noticed that there's something this morning with was it the London Tube and Express Pay and so on. So you know it's still ongoing, but switching contactless payment off if you're not using it is a benefit. The drawback is you've got to remember to switch it on to avoid the red face when your card is rejected when you go to the checkout at Sainsbury's. You can change the limit. You can say, I know that the contactless limit's £100. I don't want my card to be accepted for more than £30 or £40, just in case. But you could say that if you're using Apple Pay or Android Pay, that limit is £100. So you could have a different contactless limit on your card, and your iPhone or your Samsung phone. The last car that I got that's going back 4 years. We discovered that the Apple Pay limit in my card was in the thousands, because I managed to pay the deposit for the car on Apple Pay just by doing it and tapping it, and it worked. And that was a lesson for me. So I've got that limit set now, but actually it's extremely useful because it means I didn't have to go through the mess of bank transfers. You can say, okay, I'm not willing to have more than £200 a month as my limit for contactless payments. And you can keep checking on it, and it will show you, and it could be a calendar month or a rolling month in different banks, but it could show you you're at £170 already spent in your contactless, and you're just going to go down to Sainsbury's and you know that's going to be another 50 quid. So you can change the limit or reset it as you go. So you can, if you want, be more in control of contactless. It's extremely useful. I'll be honest, I pay almost everything using my phone through Apple Pay, because it's just so simple to do. When I'm now going down to the Tesco's down the road from us to grab stuff, I don't even take my card. My phone's with me, pay by phone, come back. And interesting watching the number of people who are doing the same, because it's easy. Online payments is the next one. You can switch on or off. So you might be going to pay something on Amazon or whatever else, and you can flip the payments on for that. I would probably suggest that you consider having it off all the time until you're going to make an online payment. Because if somebody were to get your card details through hacking a website or through whatever other mechanism they get it, if online payments are off and they try and order a Rolex watch or a new iPhone in your name, the transaction will be rejected. And then you will get told about a rejected transaction by the bank. And you can then say, well, that's fine. I wasn't actually in Lagos trying to buy a Rolex anyway. So the ability to flip online payments on or off is extremely useful. In the same way, the ability to control your ATM withdrawals. I always have ATM withdrawals off on my cards. Switch it off, and then when I'm going to the ATM, just before I get there, on the app, go into the card control, because you can have it separately for different cards, and for that card, flip on ATM withdrawals, leave it a couple of seconds to get confirmed, make your withdrawal, get your cash, get your card out, put the cash in your purse or your wallet, and then as you're walking away, flip off ATM withdrawals again. So it's only for the few seconds that you're at the ATM that your card can withdraw cash. Now think about this. We've just said your contactless can be controlled, your online payments can be controlled, your ATM withdrawals can be controlled. If you have all these things switched off and somebody steals your bit of plastic, what they've got is a bit of plastic. It can do nothing. They can't take money from you. They can't buy anything on your behalf. They can't do anything because you've switched off their ability to do it. Clever stuff. Now, next thing you can do is what's called location-based security. It's another option. Even if I had all of these things on, contactless, ATM withdrawals, whatever, if I go up to an ATM or if I go into a shop and I try and use the card and my phone is with me, then there'll be no problem, because that ATM or that shop will have an address which is within the margin of where I am. It doesn't always work. Some chains like Londis, they don't have the branch location tagged in the same way. So your location-based security will start to object, but you can override it on your phone. But it's a nice thing to think about. Is that actually a benefit? And for some people, it is. Swipe scams. If you look on the back of your card, which you've probably forgotten about, there's the black magnetic strip. And what used to be a real issue was that your card could be swiped a couple of times. If you remember long ago, it used to be they would take your card away to the back shop to swipe it and then bring you something to sign at the end. There was nothing to stop them copying that magnetic strip or swiping it twice. And in fact, there was a big problem at a petrol station just up from Barclay Church here a few years ago, where the people who were running the petrol station franchise and running the shop were cloning all the cards that had gone through that swipe, taking the details off the swipe, and then all of a sudden, all at once, all the people that had used that were getting bogus transactions from all over the place. It took them days to work out what the common factor was. And guess what? These folk had left the country. So your magnetic stripe on the back is actually a bit of a risk. It's very seldom used because we now use chip and pin or full contactless, but you have the ability to switch it on and off. You will be totally unsurprised to know that it's off on all of my cards and always will be, because it's an old, insecure way of doing things. So are there other ways of dealing with all this stuff? Well, yes, there are. And this is a really clever one that only 2 or 3 of the banks have really got their head around, and that's something called a virtual card. And the way it works is there is no card. What happens is that you get a virtual card on your account, and it might be that you can only use that virtual card once, or you might be able to use it a few times. But let's take the once situation. I'm going to buy something biggish at a shop that I don't know very well or don't know at all. I go onto my app and I get the details. I get the 16-digit card number, I get the expiry date and the CVV code for that. So I take that and I put it into the website, and you can copy and paste it in if you know how to do that. And if not, come to the ACIT sessions and we'll show you. But you copy and paste that detail into the website. The transaction goes through because the card exists. And immediately that it's gone through, the app will tell you there's a transaction gone through. If it's with one of the banks, which calls them one-shot cards, that card is cancelled. As soon as the transaction's gone through, the card is cancelled. Now you're saying, isn't that a pain? Well, you look at the number of websites that have been hacked and the credit card details have gone. Those card details are now useless because that card doesn't exist. Your bank has agreed to pay from your account to that supplier the money that was on that card, that was on that transaction. The card doesn't exist anymore. If somebody that later on hacks that account, or the same shop tries to charge you again, it will be rejected because there's no way. And yet the banks are clever. If there's a credit comes back because you return the goods and the money's come back, they can still match it up to you, but they won't let money go out on that card. It's slightly different on the ones where you can use a virtual card a few times, but very much the same principle applies. You're much more in control of it because you're now safe from all the possible hacks. It means that your risk is reduced, and also means that the bank's risk is reduced, because they're not going to have to start stumping up cash and compensation for a mistake that you've made. Because you see it in the papers every day, somebody gets scammed, sends off their life savings because the scammers were so clever, and the banks have got to compensate them for that, which means you and I, banking with them, are having to pay. The banks don't like that very much, so the more security they can bring in, the better. Personally, I think virtual cards are really clever, and I have got them set up on both my UK accounts and the account that I use internationally. And anytime I'm in the least bit unsure of who I'm buying from, I will use a virtual card to pay for it. It takes a few seconds more, but the relief is amazing. And one of the beauties is, because particularly the challenger banks, when a debit or a credit goes through, you will get a notification within a couple of seconds. You go to the ATM, and sometimes as you're bringing the cash out in your hand, you get a notification you've withdrawn the cash. When I go to Tesco's down the road, she'll say, "Do you want a receipt?" And my phone just goes, "Ping, I've got it." Before she can even ask me, I've got that notification. You don't want it all the time in all accounts, because sometimes you get 20 or 30 transactions a day in some accounts, but the ability to get that information is so good. On all cards, you can freeze them. So you're away for a couple of days and you realized you've left a card in your drawer. Well, you could just leave it in your drawer, or you could freeze it, just on the off chance you get burgled when you're away. The card's frozen, somebody steals it, we're back to it just being a bit of plastic. It will do nothing because it's frozen. And when you come home, assuming you haven't been burgled when you're away, you can unfreeze it. I do this sometimes when we're on holiday in our apartment. I will freeze the cards that I put in the safe, and all the rest of the one card I'm carrying with me, I have enabled only for the things that I want to have. Just in the case that you end up with a card having been stolen or lost, and we've all done that, you know, I know it's not being stolen, I know it was here and I can't find it and I need a new card now, then just terminate it. And it could be that you want to terminate it permanently because you're never going to use it again, or it could be terminate that card and send me a replacement. And different institutions work on that differently. They might charge you, they might, depending on your account type, they might ship you a new one free. And that happened to us. We were in our apartment in Spain, and a card had to be, for various reasons, a card had to be destroyed and replaced. Terminated it immediately in the app, tripped replace. They asked me the address it was to come to, and it was with DHL that day, and I got the new card in another country in a couple of days. So, summary time. Keeping safe. You want to make sure everything is up to date. You want to make sure that your system on your laptop, desktop, tablet, phone, that the operating system and everything is up to date and you're updating the apps as you go. If you're using a website, log out when you're done, just in case somebody else comes along, in the house or whatever, or breaks in or steals your laptop. If you log out, there is less risk of them managing to get in. And I would argue that's one of the very, very rare passwords you do not let your password manager remember, because it would be too easy then for all your careful protections to be blown away. Be extremely wary on any computer you don't own. So going into an internet cafe and doing your online banking strikes me as the equivalent of trying to jump off the Empire State Building and seeing if you can flap your wings and land without injury. I just wouldn't do it. But in an emergency, I would try and find somebody that I could get help with. As I've said, apps are best, they're easiest. And if you're outside home and using any Wi-Fi, last week we talked about VPNs. VPNs are a very, very good way of being secure. Can you imagine how secure you are then if you're using an app on your phone with its encryption, and all of that is wrapped inside a VPN with its encryption? The chances of anyone getting that data and doing anything to damage you or to get access to your financial information are pretty remote. You've more risk of them stealing the phone and selling it for 50 quid in the local bar. The risks are always there. There's risks in everything, good grief, but they're small. If you just follow a few basic rules and understand how to use your online banking, which of the app settings suit you and which don't, that's good, because having knowledge makes it better for all of us. And you come across anything that worries you, ask. If you come across some clever wrinkle that, oh, this guy in the bar told me this is a good thing to do, you think about it, you check it out and don't necessarily believe them, but if it turns out to be true, then pass that information on. Because as is true of almost anything in the online world, if we have information, the kind of information we've been talking about today, and you pass it on, it allows us to look after each other. So that's it for just now. I'm going to stop the sharing in a minute, and we can then see if there's any questions that people want answered.